I feel like my whatever degree of success I've had professionally, a lot of it comes from the confidence I got from doing those things at a younger age, and the confidence you get from like picking up the phone and calling a promoter and saying, "Hey, can my band play this show?" And them actually saying yes, or getting used to people saying no. Like it's okay if people turn you down.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today's guest is someone that we're doing a round two with because we had some technical problems last time, and we really are very appreciative for his time. Great person, really interesting career and life path, and I know you're going to get a lot out of it. Before we get to it, please subscribe to the podcast, turn on your notifications. My name is Aram Arslanian, and this is One Step Beyond. My man, welcome.
Hey, how you doing, Ram?
Good to see you again. So for those who don't know, for the uninitiated, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Garrett Rothman. If you're asking what I do as a profession, I'm a real estate broker. I help clients buy and sell real estate, lease real estate. My company is called RSR Realtors. I've been an agent for 20 years. I'm also a licensed attorney, practiced law for a few years before I got into real estate. And I still do a little bit of legal work. Um, and on the way we're connected is I'm also, I play in a couple of bands kind of in your world. And that takes up, other than work and family, band takes up most of the rest of my time. So it's, as we talked last time, it's a passion of mine, not a hobby. You made that distinction, and that actually really made an impression on me. So my passion is music.
Heck yeah, awesome. All right, because we've already talked and we've gotten to know each other a bit, I know a bunch about your story, so I'm gonna just start like hitting on a few things. Um, First, let's start with the band because that's what we kind of hit on last time, and like towards the end. And let's start in the beginning. The two bands, Don't Sleep and Calling Hours. What do you got?
So currently the most active band I'm in is called Calling Hours. We are mostly based out of Pennsylvania. Our singer kind of goes back and forth between California and Pennsylvania. Our singer is a guy named Popeye Vogelsang, who a lot of people on this podcast will remember him from being the singer for Far Side. And he really was a little bit quiet on the music side for maybe the last 8 or 10 years, but we sort of pulled him out of retirement and recorded a record with him that came out in November on Revelation Records, which was put out all the Far Side records. So that was a natural landing spot for him. But we were thrilled because we've all been massive fans of Revelation, since we got into music, basically. So that record's called Say Less. And we have been starting to tour around that record. We did a European tour in the last fall, did a little California run a few weeks ago. We're actually leaving for Europe again next week. We'll be playing 4 shows in Germany, and we're doing some stuff in California at the end of the summer. So it's keeping us busy. There's 5 people in the band. We all have careers and families and things that are that take up most of our time, but we feel amazingly grateful that we have the opportunity to do music in a meaningful way, like the way we're doing it now. So the band's a lot of fun. We also have a band called Don't Sleep, which is the same musicians, but we have a different singer. It's Dave Smalley, who was most people on this podcast will recognize from Dag Nasty and All and Down by Law. We put out a few records with that band, and he is going through some health issues now, so we're sort of quiet. We've been quiet for the past couple of years, but that that's a band I'm really proud of too.
Heck yeah. Um, so music, you've been involved in music since you were very, very young, and you got involved in punk and hardcore. Uh, Tell us a little bit about that because it's not just about the bands you played in. It was like your involvement, but you also like were part of launching a label that I have a lot of good feelings towards. And then in that, there's just like a big pause where you started your professional career. And we'll back into that, but let's talk about like how did you get into punk hardcore? How did you find it or did it find you?
It's a great question. I've always been obsessive about music. I mean, when I was a kid, I would listened to top 40 radio and I knew every word to every song and that was on the radio. So music was always on, not necessarily in my house, but in my bedroom. I always had the music on. And um, I had an older sister who was kind of in the new wave in the I would say the early 80s. And she turned me on to, I just would like, she didn't intentionally do it, but I would sneak in her room and listen to her records. And she had like Sex Pistols and The Clash and Echo and the Bunnymen and Susie and the Banshees. And so that kind of turned me on to non-radio music. Um, and I love all those bands to this day. Um, but I would say in high school, I started to go to punk shows. And I think what really pulled me in about that community and that culture is that I realized that it wasn't about like some big star on a stage and the fans, looking up in adoration, that you could actually like the band would finish playing and then the singer would go and sell t-shirts or records or whatever. And you could meet him or her and really quickly become a part of a community. So I think that's what really in addition to loving music, I think I was the idea of being part of a community of like-minded people really pulled me into the punk scene. And then my summer before my senior year in college, I was really lucky. I got to go. I lived with some relatives in the Bay Area, and I had a car that I was borrowing, which was great. And I was left totally alone because I was like living in an apartment above my aunt and uncle's garage, and they really didn't care what I was doing, in a good way. So I would drive into Berkeley a couple of times a week, and I would go to shows at Gilman Street. And I was probably 16, I guess. And I knew about it because I could buy Maximum Rock and Roll in my town at the local record store, and it had show listings for Gilman Street. So I went, and it just blew me away because, I mean, first of all, I saw like a lot of my favorite bands that summer, but also just seeing, I didn't really understand what punk meant as sort of as an organized community until that point, but seeing like people volunteering at the show, um, the guy collecting money at the door would then go and play drums in the band later that night. And they had a policy. I think you had to have like a membership card there, but you also had to volunteer if you wanted to go to shows regularly, or if you wanted to play there. So just being able to see how that community worked got me excited about wanting to kind of take my interest in punk like one step further or a couple steps further. And so after that summer, I came back home and I became friends with this band called Admiral that you and I talked about at length last time. They were like the local hero hardcore band that kind of made it out. There weren't a lot. They maybe were the only one that really made it out and actually like did US tours and put out records that were pretty widely distributed. And I became good friends with them. And the day after I graduated from high school, they took me on tour with them on a US tour as their roadie. Looking back now, like I know people who are professional roadies now, and like I understand what they do. And I don't know, I had no, like I didn't know how to change a string. I didn't know how to put a drum kit together. I really had like no skills except for that. I think they probably didn't even know what to look for in a roadie either, except for I was just like a guy who liked them and they liked me, and I would dance when they played. So they took me on tour with them, and that was really eye-opening because we went back to Gilman Street. They played there. We met a guy named Kent McClard who ended up putting out their record, who had a big record distribution company, but also had a fanzine, a label. And they played some shows with Green Day on that tour before Green Day became, what they are now. But that showed me like, oh, you can be in a band from a small town in Pennsylvania and you can go on tour and you can like really do as a get to see the country and get to meet people from your community, but all over the country. And so I think doing that's what really set me off into wanting to like do a record label, be in bands, and like really do things on a different level. And it all
Gonna,
happened. I was like 18 years old by then, so it like happened in a very short time period.
yeah. If you don't mind, I want to touch on something here. Like that idea, and this is not a commentary on anyone in Admiral's musical ability or anything like that, but that idea that people could tour the country and like start venues and start fanzines and do these things, but actually have no like education in these things, no background in these things, no training, no infrastructure, no money. Uh, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but the idea of, I think some of the coolest, I don't want to say training, but well, I guess you could say training. Some of the best training you can get for like the real world is playing or being involved in the punk scene, playing in a punk band or putting on shows or any of those things. Because that idea of like having literally nothing, including like no talent, but then being able to do stuff that could take you national or international or put out a fanzine that changes people's lives is huge. I want to go back specifically to something like Maximum Rock and Roll and Tim Yohannan. Like the impact that person had and still has, and of course, rest in peace, Tim. The impact that person has cannot be understated. That person has literally changed tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people's lives just because they decided with some friends to start a venue and start a fanzine and do something. And that led to someone like Kent McClard, who I just give huge props to Kent, because if you were no answers and ebullition records and all of that stuff in the 90s and early 2000s was like a center of gravity and like life changing. And this is just some dude from California who was just like, yeah, I'm just going to do this thing. And all of it just comes from people being into something and being like, yeah, I just want to make this thing happen. And that's like one of the most powerful things I've ever come into contact with in my life. It's just the willingness to do and the willingness to dare to create something.
Yeah, I think, part of coming up in a punk world, and the punk world, and whether you're in a band or doing a fanzine or just going to shows and, being a part of something, putting on shows, is that you don't have to ask anyone's permission to do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And really, there's no point, because there's really no, I mean, now, this punk thing is 50 years old almost. Um, now there is a blueprint, and you can look back on history and see how others did it. And I mean, I guess I'm dating myself when I say this, but I feel like at the time there was much less of that. I mean, I think Discord had like a handwritten list of like venues and promoters, um, that somehow we got a hold of. And that's when I was in my band I started after that, called Junction, that's how we booked our tour. We just had like this photo Xeroxed handwritten list of people across the country who were known to put on shows. And you just pick up the phone and call them, and half the time the number had already changed, or their parents would be like, he doesn't live here anymore, but like you just had to, you kind of had to follow your own path or create a path.
Yeah, like the idea of zines. Like I just, for anyone listening to this who's just unaware or has kind of heard the term, like there was Maximum Rock and Roll, and then of course like so many other incredible zines, but they had this thing called Book Your Own Fucking Life, which was essentially you could write into this thing and list your house as a place for people to crash, or a venue, or like your record store, or all of these, your co-op. It was insane. And when I was a kid, and so this is like pre-internet, and then also kind of when internet was starting and kind of like becoming a little bit of a thing. Some friends and I drove out from Calgary, Alberta, where I lived, out to the first Crazy Fest in Louisville, Kentucky.
Mhm.
And we used that Book Your Own Fucking Life just to crash at people's houses. And it was insane. Like, and I was like young. And I
Yeah.
couldn't believe people were just letting us stay at their house. Like these, like, just like random people are like, yeah, it's cool. Come stay at my house. It's like, what? That's insane. But that's that power of people coming together, don't know each other, but they believe ish in the same thing. And they're like, yeah, we're just going to make this happen.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? And that no cell phones. I mean, the number of like shows that we booked on that first Admiral tour where we would drive, they had a show in Little Rock, Arkansas, which actually was a really good show. And the next show they had was in Lubbock, Texas, which is probably, I don't know, 1,000 miles. It's
Yeah.
forever. And we got all the way to Lubbock and found out the show was canceled,
Oh,
like, and then the next show was in Phoenix,
oh
but
my God.
now can you imagine? I mean, you would be checking in with the promoter, every hour until they respond, you'd be texting, you'd see flyers online, like
Totally.
it was sort of like on good faith that you did this stuff. But the funny thing is those fails are the ones you really remember, almost more than like the good shows,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it was like such an experience. But do you remember the booklet that Simple Machines put out on how to put out your own record? Did you ever follow that booklet? I
No.
forget what it's called. The label Simple Machines put out a booklet that you could just send them, $1 in the mail, and they'd mail it back to you, which showed you how to put out your own record, how to start your own record label, which is so counterintuitive because they were a record label putting out, cool independent bands, and they were encouraging other people to do the same thing, which is like bringing on competitors, right? So like in the normal world, the normal corporate world, that would never happen. But it like said, this is how these are studios you go to. This is how you record a record. This is how, if you want to have the record pressed, these are the pressing plants you can send your work to. This is what they'll need from you. This is how you get artwork done. This is how you get, records distributed. But like, that was kind of like book your own fucking life. That was like something that a lot of people use to start their own record labels. God bless them.
Yeah. It's just an interesting idea that, like, unified by a type of music, unified by kind of like sort of shared politics, or sort of shared ways of living. Some people are straight edge, some people are vegetarian or vegan, some people believe in this or that, but really more so just connected by almost a community. And like, again, loosely like punk or loosely like hardcore or whatever it was at the time. And everyone coming together, and of course having their like arguments and their beef and whatever it is, but everyone coming together being like, oh no, we're just going to create this insane network, literal worldwide network of people, where we're going
Right,
to start bands, we're going to put you up, we're going to have venues, we're going to promote ourselves, we're going to do all these things, all pre-internet or early internet. Just
right.
so powerful and so insane that that happened. So let's bring that back, though. A band that and you seemed a bit surprised when you and I first met in person, and I knew the band. Let's bring it back to Junction. When did you start playing in Junction, and how did that happen?
So I started playing. Junction was a band I started in my first year in college. I was not a great student in high school at all. So I applied to one college and I didn't even get into it technically. I applied to Penn State University, which is a huge university, but my grades were too lousy to get into the main campus. So they sent me to a branch campus, which was in the middle of nowhere. It was in a state forest, like an hour and a half south of where I lived. I mean, literally, there was nothing there. And it actually ended up being a very kind of bucolic and um, sort of a nice soft landing for an immature student. I mean, a mature kid who was a bad student because there weren't a lot of distractions there. But like the last thing I thought would happen when I was there was I would play in a band. And I just gotten back from tour with Admiral. So I was like, damn, like I want to go live somewhere cool where there's a lot of music happening and there's bands. But, I figured I need to get my degree. And like I said, I didn't have a lot of options. So, but like my first day of classes, there was a kid sitting in front of me wearing a Bauhaus shirt. And again, this particular campus had its own woodsman team. So they would have like wood chopping competitions and like, axe throwing and crazy shit like that. Like that was the main and then people would like roll kegs out into the woods and make campfires and just drink and then like jump over the fires. And I was like, where the fuck am I? They're not my people. But I was only supposed to be there for a year, so I was like, I can make this work. It's fine. But I sat down my first class, and there's a kid sitting in front of me wearing a Bauhaus shirt, and I was like, hey, Bauhaus, I love that band. He's like, oh, thanks, and we started talking about music, and before I knew it, he was telling me he's a drummer, and he was a local because his mom was the dean of our college. So he's like, I live off campus. I have like a basement with drums and musical equipment, and he said, and I have my best friend from childhood is from Philadelphia, where he used to live, just started going to school here too, and he plays guitar, and you want to get together? And I was like, sure. And he said, do you play anything? And I said, I own a bass, but I don't really know what to do with it. And they're like, he said, that's fine. You can just fake it. That's what most bass players do, which is still true to this day. I'm still faking it. Um, so we started jamming and started just messing around and writing music. And um, we started the band. We recorded a couple songs and we were able to put out a record, like a split 7-inch with this band called Separate Piece, and played our first show. And then we were a 3-piece. And I think our guitarist was like, he's a good singer, but I could tell he's a really good guitarist. And I think he was I felt like he was struggling to like play what he really could play
Mhm.
and sing at the same time. And none of us were really good lyric writers either. So we had the RA in our dorm, which an RA is the resident assistant. It's someone who like she's a student, but she gets to live in the dorm for free because she's kind of like the den mother or like she's kind of in charge of to make sure the students don't like burn the dorm down. Was this woman Vanessa, and we just loved her. She was really cool, and we said, would you want to sing for a band? And she's like, oh, I don't know, like I'm super preppy, and I like Michael Jackson, and I don't think it could work. And we're like, just give it a shot. You've got a lot of personality, and we knew she had a good voice. So she started singing for us, and she became our singer. And I felt like that's really when the band congealed and got its own personality. And she was a great lyricist, and she was a really good front person. Um, so we ended up we left that campus after a year and went to the main campus in State College, which was pretty small college town. Like without the university, there's nothing else there. There's just like 2 or 3 streets, but a really cool place to be like a 19-year-old because everyone is there as your age. There were a lot of record stores, arcades, music stores, um, cool bookstores, and it was easy to do a band there because you put up a couple flyers on the main street, like on telephone poles, and like everyone knew what was happening because everyone was always walking around in the downtown area, and became an awesome place to start a band. Really, we had a great following, and like I booked shows there, and so I was able to bring all my friends' bands that I'd met on tour, and we did that band for probably 4 years or so, and then just sort of life happened. We all kind of moved on to, the next thing in our lives.
So it was kind of parallel, if I'm right, that also you started with your friend Art Monk Construction Records, right?
Yeah, so we about that time, there's a guy named Eric Astor who was from Phoenix, and he played in a band called Wind of Change that I had met on tour, like when they came through Pennsylvania years earlier. And then I met him when I was in Arizona with Admiral. Um, I ran into him, and we had sort of reconnected. We became pen pals, which is also like a weird hardcore thing at the time. I'm sure you had them too. Like
Mhm.
you're writing these like letters to other people who are sort of strangers, and you're just writing about like whatever you're listening to or whatever shows you went to or what zines you liked. So he and I were sort of just writing letters back and forth, and he would send me bootleg T-shirts and stuff like that every once in a while. But at some point, he called me and he said, "I want to move to the East Coast," and I said, "Great." He said, "But I really don't want to." Like a lot of the people from his band had moved to DC. He said, "I really don't want to live in a big city. I'd like to live in a smaller town." I said, "Well, come to State College. I mean, it's a cool, everyone's sort of transitory. Like you can walk everywhere. It's super cheap. We had a 4-bedroom house that we were paying $800 a month total to live in. Um, so I said, why don't you come here and let's start a record label. Maybe we can play music together." So he did it. He packed up his stuff and he moved, and we started a record label really right away. And our timing was great. Our friends had a band called Hoover that the guitarist from Hoover was in Admiral. So that was my connection to them. And the other guitarist, Alex, was in Wind of Change that Eric Astor was in the band with. So we had a real connection with them. Um, and they were just starting to get together. And then there's another band called Lincoln that Junction had played our first show with. They were actually called Ice Fan at the time, but it was basically the same personnel. And they were starting this band called Lincoln that we saw play and we loved. And so I asked them to put out a split 7-inch, and they did because, Lincoln Hoover, like two presidents, and we called it, the two-headed coin, two-sided coin, um, two-headed coin. And that was a great first release because it just like I called Kent McClard and I was like, "Hey, I'm doing this," because he had this distribution company. And I said, "I'm doing this record, and um, it's Hoover and Lincoln." He said, "Just send me as many as you have. Just send me everything you have. Like as many as your first pressage, just send them to me, and I'll sell all of them." And so, it was a great way to start the label, got us a lot of kind of notoriety right away. And to this day, it's a pretty like celebrated. That 7-inch is probably what the label is kind of best known for. It's still like people talk about it a lot.
Yeah, let's hit on that 7-inch. real interesting time in punk and hardcore because, you could feel like the reaction to kind of the rev sound, right? Like the rev sound was kind of like more, I guess people could relate to being a little bit more like jockey or a little bit like straight edge, vegetarian, like aggressive, loud. And then at the same time going on a DC was kind of like more like Dag Nasty and Embrace and all those bands. And of course later on Fugazi, that was like bands that had been aggressive and had been loud and boisterous and super like in your face, had switched sounds to being like more melodic and having more ideas. And that reaction of the kids that were fans of, let's say, like a Youth of Today or a Youth of, or Judge or whatever, then getting into more of those DC bands and being inspired to them, and their art taking a dramatic shift. So you don't have like the crazy live photo of a jack dude like jumping to the crowd, but instead you have, the Lincoln, Hoover Split, or all the stuff that came out on Art Monk. It's like a real interesting shift because punk and hardcore is like a reaction to what came before. And then it's like, okay,
Totally.
this is what we're going to do now. This is what we're going to do now. And I always felt Art Monk was such a, Art Monk Construction was a really cool label because every record looked like it should be on that label. And every
Mm.
band didn't sound the same, but they sounded like they play a show together. It was a very well, and I know it wasn't, or maybe it was intentional, but from an audience perspective, it felt really like a really perfect documentation of a time and a reaction to what had happened before. That 7 inch specifically, like if you see the shift between the first Lincoln 7 inch and how like they were more kind of aggressive and hard to that 7 inch, like that split 7 inch where it was like way more emotional, more musical, like a little bit lo-fi, more lo-fi. It just says so much at that time about that time.
Yeah, I mean, what an exciting time. And we were, I wish I wish I could say it was all intentional, but really it's like whatever our friends happened to be doing in that moment is what we were putting out.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, we had this connection with Lincoln. We had the drummer for Hoover also was in a band called Fine Day before Hoover, and Junction had toured with Fine Day. So like we became friends. So we knew all four of the guys in Hoover. I knew them really well. Like they were my friends. And so it was like, isn't it cool that my friends are making this great music? It would be great if we could put out one of their songs. And then like we did a couple of Kerosene 454 records, and those guys were all in Wind of Change with Eric. So that's how that happened. We did an Iceburn record who was on Rev, and that was like they were from Salt Lake. We were just talking about Salt Lake a few minutes ago, but they were Eric knew them from their previous band, from their straight edge band they were in, um and then like we did this Karate Crown Hate Ruin record, and Karate Jeff Farina is from my town, and I grew up with him. Well, I sort of met him in high school, but he's from my same little town, and he started this little band called Karate, and we were lucky to get one of their songs. And now like Karate's this like it's amazing. I mean, they've gotten the records were all just re-released and
Mm.
by Numero Group, and they're like playing sold out shows all over the world. It's crazy. But it was just like he was our friend, and I
Yeah.
love his music and wanted to, you know, I always felt like it's interesting. Jeff Farina has this other band. Jeff Farina from Karate has another band called Secret Stars. And I remember asking what the origin was of the name, and they said because we feel like we're from this community. I'm probably botching this, but this is how I remember it, or how like what stuck with me. We come from this world where um a, a lot of very talented people, but people who aren't self-promoters necessarily. So they're like secret stars. So like I thought it was cool to do a label because you could help sort of elevate your friends' art, because they weren't necessarily going to do it themselves, and they're humble and they don't like to promote their own work, but to like help my friends be heard better was a really cool experience. And that's why I wanted to do a label for sure.
Yeah. So much of your story um, relates to your professional career now, and we'll get into that, of course. But so much is about relationships. You're like, oh yeah, so I was this kid, and I met this band Admirable, and we did this tour. I met all these people. Then I was going to college, and I remember I knew this guy and I knew that guy, and then this person moved here, and we'd invite our friends. Like doing all of these things. Like arguably, and I hope you'll take this the right way. You and I have no right, at least at that age, and maybe even now, to really be doing anything in music. Like I am a
Well,
terrible.
especially now, 52, I should not be, leaving to go on tour in Europe next week, or there's no
Right.
reason why it should be. But on the same token, sorry, just to fill my water. At that age, we had no reason. I mean, first of all, I didn't know how to play an
Right.
instrument.
Right.
I mean, I could barely, thank God I had a tuner. I would have never known how to tune my instrument. I didn't know how to write a song,
Yeah.
we couldn't even play cover songs.
Yeah.
People would be like, "Are you a cover band?" And I'd be like, "No." But one of the reasons why is because we couldn't, I mean, I will say at Junction, our guitarist, Greg Foreman, who now is like, he's had a very successful career in music, and he's played in a lot of like plays in Cat Power, and he's in, I think he played in the Gossip, and I just see him on TV. He's like a session, like guitarist and stuff. Like I couldn't play cover songs because I didn't know how to play. I couldn't play them, like they
Right.
were too hard for me to play. So some of punk music is just like you write original music because you can actually play it.
Yeah. Well, this idea of and even like let's just say in like professional world, the idea of like people with like a super high education or like real intense like expertise in something versus people who can just figure it out.
Right.
Like one of the things I try and tell people when they're thinking about hiring and building talent is like, listen, I would 100 times over hire someone who just has a history of figuring stuff out and doesn't necessarily have deep expertise or like all the degrees. And like I really often tell people, oh, you should hire someone who's like grown up playing music or been involved in music, or someone who's been very involved in art or theater, someone who's used to putting things on and getting things done with almost nothing. That will be the best hire you ever had because there's just something about like, like going back to that idea. It's like, dude, you don't even know how to play bass. I barely know how to play guitar still. Like I started playing guitar or bass when I was 15 and I'm going to be 50 and I'm not much better than I was when I was 15. Like I suck, but I know how to write a song. I know how to do this. I know how to do that. But most of all, I know how to I have the right relationships with people because I care and I love my friends and I love doing this stuff. And that idea of how that can create a pathway for you unexpectedly and you could do so much cool stuff just by like being earnest, giving it your all, figuring it out and having the right relationships.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, so I'm not trying to transition the conversation to my current professional life, but I mean, a lot of what I feel like my whatever degree of success I've had professionally, a lot of it comes from the confidence I got from doing those things at a younger age,
Yeah,
and the confidence you get from like picking up the phone and calling a promoter and saying, "Hey, can my band play this show?" And them actually saying yes,
yeah,
or getting used to people saying no. Like
yeah,
it's okay if people turn you down. It's like because if you think like, okay, 90% of the time I'm going to get turned down, or whatever it is, 50, 90, 80. If someone says no to you, it's like, oh, that's one less no I'm going to have to get over because the yes is coming pretty soon. And so I think being in a band, starting a label, booking tours, doing a fanzine, um, all those things really teach you great sort of interpersonal skills, but they also teach you to like grind and
yeah,
to be afraid of failure and rejection, and but also to like you get hooked on the success too. That when it does work out, it's like you want more of that, right?
yeah. I want to hit on, and I think this is a perfect transition to talking about career, but I do want to hit on that the kind of the guts to grind and to ask for things. So in the first like real tour that my own band did. Like we do like when I was very young, we'd done like little weekend things where we'd literally have to call promoters. This is way before the internet. Call promoters or write to them and ask. And we got to do some cool stuff and play with some cool bands. But that was when I was like very young. I was just finishing high school. Uh, but when I did my first real deal tour, the internet did exist. I could email people, but it was still like very early days. And I remember asking promoters, they were like big shows, and be like, hey, could we get on that show? Just emailing some promoter who I'd never heard of. And some of them were like legit promoters. And then being like, oh, yeah, you guys are from Vancouver. Yeah, no problem. I got you on. You can open. And not only did they put us on, they paid us super well, like really fairly. And it was
They
like,
assumed you were like a real band because you had some.
actually, No, they
Awesome.
didn't. They didn't think we were real bad. They took pity on us. But it was the like, and of course we got no's and people ignored us and like and all of that. But on that tour, we did a 6 week tour on a demo, just me and my friends, and it was really just people like kind of taking pity on us and helping us. And a lot of bands at the time were very helpful to us. Like a lot of bands that were happening at the time. It was just this
Which band was
amazing.
this?
It was a it was a band called Face Tomorrow. We were
Okay.
so bad. Like, I
Not a
mean,
bad name.
embarrassingly bad. I mean, obviously inspired by Mouthpiece and a shout out to Tim. But um, we did this tour, and just what I learned about just asking for something and seeing what happens, and then earning it, like showing up and being super respectful, working hard, like playing well, like being really respectful of the space, being grateful for the help and what you got paid. On that tour, I learned so much about like just putting yourself out there and not taking it personal if people say no. That's helped me so much in my professional career, and actually it's helped me a lot with this podcast. When I started this podcast, I just started asking people that I admired to be on the podcast, and they could be business people, they could be people from the punk scene. And of course, it's like during COVID, 9,000 people start podcasts. Like, who am I to have a podcast? And we got a lot of people ignoring us. We had a lot of people like being like, "Oh no, I can't make it," and like whatever. But I had one person that I looked up to my entire life, or most of my life, and who we hit up, who took the time to get on the phone with who was then my assistant to basically be like, "Fuck your podcast," and I was like totally taken aback, like, "Oh my god!" And basically, we'd had someone on the podcast that they personally didn't like, and that's the episode they listened to. And they went up and down my assistant at the time and said some really horrible, like actually horrible shit. The reason
Wow.
I'm saying this is like I took it in stride because I was like, at first I was like, oh shit, like maybe I shouldn't do this, and oh, maybe fuck our podcast, and maybe maybe this is like maybe like we're all like totally got this wrong, and I shouldn't try and do this business podcast and that kind of has a punk side, a punk angle. And I really thought about it and thought about it, and I just went back to like, fuck, that guy just did the most punk thing. Like, he doesn't know a lot of facts, doesn't really know us, doesn't know anything, super salty. He's like, fuck you. And it's like kind of getting a shitty review, in a fanzine. And then the counter move to that is being like, fuck yeah, all right, cool, man. You do your thing. We're going to keep going. And it was like a real good learning lesson. And it goes back, or a good lesson I learned. It goes right back to asking for things that you want. Just, it's not personal. Take it in stride, use it as a growing opportunity. And some of the critique that guy gave beyond being like, fuck you, was like good critique. And I was like, cool. And I've applied it.
Really?
So
Huh.
yeah, that the willingness to put yourself out there, to ask for things, and to like totally not only get a no or get ignored, but also get negative feedback and take it in stride and learn from it is what I learned from punk, and I'm still using it today.
You have to get thick skin, right? I mean, you can't, you can't take things personally at all, but that would have been tough. I think if someone called in and told me that I mean, he could have also just said, no, thank you, or I'm not available, or, I'm not into podcasts, but the fact that you can take something positive away from that is impressive. That means that you're a pretty confident, healthy person because I might have
I'll
cried.
I'll tell you. Well, I had like 48 hours of total depression. I was like really bummed. And I'll tell you who it is afterwards, not on the podcast, but like,
Yeah.
and you'll laugh about it. But I was like, and it's not anyone listening, it's not who you think it is. But I thought about it for a long time, for about 48 hours. And just like anyone growing up in the punk scene, it's like sometimes you meet someone like Walter Schreifels and you're like, oh, dude, you're awesome. Like, you
Yeah.
have no reason to be cool to me, and you are so fucking cool.
That's
And
just his
then
natural state, is to be cool to everybody.
totally. But then you meet other people that you look up to, and you're like, you have no reason to be awful to me, and you're so shitty, like you're so terrible. Um,
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point because I feel like that's something I don't know. I think it was how I was raised by my parents, or it's just like, the it's one. I have a lot of negative personality traits for sure, but one thing I think that comes naturally to me is I try to be. You said earnest earlier. I try to be earnest with everybody, and I try to treat people regardless of who they are, whether I need something from them or whether, there's something they can provide to me. You just treat everyone well and with respect, and you be generous with other people. And so then when the time comes when you actually need to ask them for something, it's natural. It's not like, oh, he's that person who's only nice when he wants something or when he needs something. But if you're like consistently um just treat people well, even when there's no reason to do it, everything, when you do need to ask for something, it's a lot smoother and it's a lot more natural. And yeah, I mean, Walter's a perfect example of that. Like he's just, treats everyone well for, just because that's just the person he is. But, if he ever needed to do a GoFundMe, God forbid, like he'd probably make $5 million just in overnight because he's done so much for so many people, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's also that idea, I think, of when you have a certain amount of influence or success or power, um, the the ability to be shitty is so easy, and it can kind of go on autopilot. People can go on autopilot, and then there's other people who are just naturally cool, like Walter. But sometimes it's like, you've got a lot of influence, power, success, or whatever, and you have to be intentional about being cool. Like being a boss, which again we'll get to. It's like you have to be intentional about being cool sometimes and be like, oh, I'm irritated by this. This just pissed me off. But I know if I act like an asshole right now, which depending on the situation, you might be entitled to do, what it means to me versus what it means to the person I'm about to talk to is going to be totally set, like totally different things. And I actually have to gear back and I have to be thoughtful. And I think the ability of someone like, again, let's just say Walter, who I give a lot of praises to, because Walter's been specifically like very, very, really helpful to me and very quite kind to me, um, is the idea of like some people, and I think it is for Walter, he's just naturally like that. But also, I think it's like, even if you're not naturally like that, like being intentional about being like, hey, I don't want to be shitty, and I actually have to be thoughtful of like not taking for granted my position and my power and my influence in this situation. That's tough, but it's a discipline that I think if you get any level of wind in your sales, you've got to be intentional about being cool to people and being kind and like really plugged into people.
Yeah, because they're expecting you to be a dick a lot of the time. Especially if you're in a leadership position, they're expecting you to treat them shitty because they've probably been treated, poorly by, supervisors or bosses or parents or teachers or whatever, throughout their lives. And so if you can go in the other direction and treat them well, it can really make a positive impact on people.
Heck yeah. All right, so let's get into your career. What is a real estate broker? What do you do?
So I'm a real estate broker in Pennsylvania. So I'm licensed throughout the state of Pennsylvania, and we basically assist people buy, sell, lease real estate. And so that can be homes, it can be commercial properties, apartment buildings, it could be land, um, condos, office buildings, really pretty much anything. Most real estate agents really specialize in one area or the other. I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I would call it a small to medium size. It's the capital, Pennsylvania, but if you poll most people in the US and ask them what the capital of Pennsylvania is, most of them will get it wrong. They'll say either Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. Um, Most people don't even know what Harrisburg is. It's actually, we live close to Hershey. So I'm almost to the point now when I travel, I tell people I'm from Hershey because everyone knows Hershey. Um, but we help people because I'm in a small town. I don't specialize as much. I do commercial real estate sales. I do residential, um, and I do land development, things like that. But we represent clients who are doing these transactions, and we advise them and we help them get from sort of finding the property to closing on the purchase of the property or closing on their lease, and help them on every step along the way.
What's the difference between a real estate broker and a real estate agent, or is there no difference?
That's a good question. So it's a different, so a real estate broker is someone who can own their own real estate company. And so it's a license that you have to get sort of later on in your career, and allows you to supervise other agents. So real estate agent is someone who's a licensee, and you can get your license pretty easily, it's maybe an 8-week process to become a real estate agent. So that's someone who can, early on in their career, they can start doing transactions, whereas a broker is someone who can actually own their own office and supervise other agents. So I started as an agent and then I became a broker.
Uh, it's kind of like an oddly, as an industry, it actually oddly has a lot of like punks in it, and actually like quite notable punks in it. You know, yourself, Andrew Klein, shout out to Andrew. But Taylor Steele, who's like, he might
Yes.
be the OG real estate agent from the punk scene, from
Yeah.
Four Walls Falling.
For Walls
Uh,
Falling.
am,
Yeah.
am I
I met
missing
Taylor
anyone?
in high school when they played in our town at this little punk show. I took him and his bandmates to up the road to a convenience store to buy snacks before the show. So he probably doesn't remember me, but I remember him from those days.
And he's been doing it forever, like forever, forever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And Andrew, I just saw Andrew when we were in LA a few weeks ago. We were talking about this. We said we need to do a podcast with you and him and Taylor Steele. And I don't know, I know there's a lot of other real estate agents. Yes, there are a lot of real estate agents who are punk rockers for sure.
So I want to get into the industry and talk about it, and some of like the pros and the cons of it in terms of like the business world, but also how people interact with real estate. But specifically, what's appealing to it as a guy who kind of came up in punk and punk and slash kind of like indie stuff. What we will talk about how you got here, but today you even playing in active bands, what's appealing about this industry for you?
Well, I like the fact at this point in my life and having a family, what 3 children who are all kind of in slightly different places in life, different places in the country even. So, and then I have a band that keeps me busy and my wife and I like to travel. What I love about my career right now is that it gives me a lot of flexibility. Um, Technology has helped a lot because I used to have to run around and get people to physically sign contracts. I had to fax things or scan things that never really looked right. So then you had to rescan them. I was working a lot at night and on weekends. Now with the tech, with DocuSign and things like that, the technologies help. But also where I am in my career right now, being more established, doing this for 20 years, I love the fact that I can kind of do it um, and still be able to pursue these other passions in my life. Um, and also, I love the fact that I have clients who understand that. So from time to time, I'll get a call from someone saying, "Hey, I want to see this property right now," and it's okay for me to say, "I'll tell you what, I'd love to be able to show it to you right now. I happen to be at my daughter's basketball game or something. Would it be possible if we did it later today or tomorrow?" And people get that. Not all professions are like that. I have a good friend who's an ER doctor, and it's like when he's in there and someone comes in after a motorcycle accident, it can't be like he can't be like, "Oh, sorry, I got to go to band practice," or whatever. So um obviously he's dealing with life and death stuff. And um so I appreciate the flexibility that I have. um I appreciate the fact that I am a people pleaser. I've learned that about myself. That's a personality trait that I've discovered about myself in recent years. um and it allows me to actually um work harder for people so that they're satisfied and they feel like they've been well taken care of, and I get satisfaction from that. And I think those are probably the two, the two things that you know, financially, it's great. There are a lot of good opportunities, and I appreciate, the position that's helped me and my family, arrive at, in life. But it's really the satisfaction I get from clients and taking care of clients many have become my friends. And it's the flexibility that it gives me in my
Yeah.
personal life.
So you and Andrew have something that I think is like probably somewhat attached to your industry is like you're both real relationship people. Like Andrew Klein knows everybody, friends with everybody. Everyone's got like an Andrew story. And it's like, it's like as soon as bring up his name, everyone's smiling. And
Yes.
everyone knows you. It's like it's crazy that you and I didn't meet until we were like much older. Because everyone knows you and you know everyone and everyone's got a good word to say about you. So it's that idea of like knowing people, having good relationships, like showing care, showing attention. That seems to be like a through line through your whole story ever since you were a little kid to now.
Well, I'll tell you it's one thing that gives me a lot of satisfaction is I know, like, I'll have a client, we'll do some sort of real estate transaction that goes well, and they'll call me a year later and say, "Hey, I'm looking for an accountant. Can you recommend someone?" Or, "Hey, I need a, you know, my I need a therapist. Can you recommend a therapist? Or I need a, and I guess we build a trusting relationship. And even though I'm no expert on what makes a good therapist, I probably happen to know someone who has a good reputation in our community. And so I think that gives me a lot of those relationships that you develop and the trust you develop that can lead to, a lifetime of them sort of knowing that they can count on you, is really satisfying to me. And again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying before, just treat people well in all circumstances and always take the extra step to ask how people are doing and, ask if there's any way you can help them. And then, in turn, the business will come. They'll see that you're the kind of person who's helpful, and they'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Andrew way cooler than I am, by the way. He's like played in bigger bands, cooler bands. He's in LA. I did listen to a podcast of him one time. He like worked in cool like clothing stores in LA. I mean, he's definitely way cooler than I am. But the fact that you said my name in his breath is an honor.
Well, and so like my whole crew here, like my wife Monica and Mike, who's our engineer, who's also one of our best friends. We all know Andrew well and have traveled with him and know him. Like I absolutely love him. And Mike just got off tour with Berthold City, and he's dying
Oh,
laughing
wow.
behind the camera because he's got some Andrew stories. Andrew, you rock. We love you. Um, what you said is interesting to me because our real estate agent, my wife and I, our real estate agent is this guy named Paul Fraser, and I met Paul because I bought a house from him. So he was the real estate agent for the other party. And
Right.
I was so bummed on my real estate agent, who I thought just totally sucks. I had two real estate agents before that who I just felt like, we're talking about the biggest purchase you're ever going to have in your life. And I'm not an expert. Like I don't know anything about houses. I'm I'm this is a huge stretch for me to be able to buy these properties. I'm scared, I'm nervous. And the first person I ever dealt with was just I don't want to say con man, that's too far. But basically it was like I was just a get this person a house as quick as we can. It's a hot
Right.
market. I don't really care what you get. I just want you to sell something. And I ended up buying something that wasn't ideal. And then I had that for a while, and then we upgraded to something else. And we had someone else who I went to with. I was like, oh, I'm going to try a different real estate agent, and brought those concerns. I was like, this is the experience I had, and they said all the right things. And shame
Right.
on me for kind of getting tricked into it. I had basically the exact same experience. So when I was buying this second place a few years later, dealing with Paul, who was the other real estate agent, I was like, this guy rocks. I want this guy to be my real estate agent. And years later, he helped me buy the house that my family lives in now. And he was
Cool.
incredible. And we became like really, he's like one of our best friends. And when I need a contractor or I need this or I need that or accountant or whatever, I always call him because he knows everybody and he's usually right. He usually gives you a great recommendation. So it is a real relationship based, and not just to get something, but like the real relationship based industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first got into the business 20 years ago, I decided early on that my goal was not, of course, I wanted to make enough money. We just had our second child, and I quit a corporate law. I left a corporate law field that was, had a lot more guarantees than real estate, which is 100% commission based. I mean, there are no salaries in this industry. So I decided I want to build up a book of clients. I'm more interested in like building up a lot of relationships and clients than I am in doing like the size of the deals I'm doing. So I would literally do any deal. If someone would call me and say, I want to rent, I want to rent out a doghouse for my dog, I'd be like, I'm going to find you that doghouse, or like someone would call and say, I want to do a little like frozen yogurt spot and I only need 400 square feet and my budget's $500 a month. I'd be like, I'm going to find you that frozen yogurt spot. And I'm not exaggerating. I would run around and do any deal because I figured this person who's like renting this apartment or buying this little house, it's not a big commission, or leasing out this little space for their accounting firm they're starting, is going to be, they're going to have a career trajectory. They're young, and I'm relatively young too at the time. But they're going to have a trajectory where later they're going to need more help. They're going to need other properties. Or they're going to recommend me to their friends, or they're going to tell their mother that they should use me or whatever. So I just wanted to get in front of as many people as I possibly could in a meaningful way. And so someone told me very early on when I first started, get the dollar signs out of your eyes. If clients see that you're only after a commission or only after a paycheck, they're not going to trust you or respect you. And so I really, sometimes people will be like, what, you're going to work for me? We've been running around for 3 weeks trying to find a property and your commission's going to be like $500. Are you okay with that? I'm like, sure. I just want to do the deals and take care of you. So, that experience you got, you had with those agents who just wanted to seem to get all they seemed to care about was getting the deal done. I really made a concerted effort not to be that kind of agent. And to this day, I think the way I gain the most credibility with clients is when I tell them not to buy something.
Hmm.
They'll call me and say, I want to go see this property. I'm really interested in it. And I'm not going to talk them out of it if I think it's a good deal, but sometimes they want to buy it and I know it's not good for them and I'll tell them that. And they're surprised. Like, when do you ever go to like a car dealership and you drive a car and then the guy or woman showing it to you says, oh, you shouldn't buy this car, you should probably go down to the other lot down the street and buy one from them. It never happens.
Yeah.
But if you're honest and you're truthful and and you're credible, then you'll tell your client what you really believe, and because it's the right thing for them. So
Yeah.
for me, that's helped my career, I believe, being that way.
Well, I want to hit this like kind of trust factor from two different angles, but the first one I want to go to is it's not intended to be a critique of the industry at all or anything like that. But of course, being a professional and also just being an adult in the world, real estate has become increasingly daunting for people. And like we have three kids, my wife and I. We have a 28-year-old, a 20-year-old, and then a 6-year-old. And um, the 20-year-old is already like, I'll never own a house. Like, I'll never be able to own a house. Like, I can never afford it. And a house in Vancouver, like a house, a detached house, is like 2 million some dollars. And yeah, and even a condo, like a two-bedroom condo, is like we're looking at, like, and of course depending where it is and how much, but we're talking like the high sixes and getting into the sevens. So like in terms of digits, but it's really really hard to own here. But also, it's like we were just in Salt Lake City the other day, visiting my wife's brother, and they were talking about how crazy real estate is. Real estate has become crazy everywhere. So, what advice do you have for people who are kind of listening to this and thinking like, yeah, I'm screwed, I'm never going to buy anything? And the advice would be like, how do they do it? How do they get into the market and kind of build that security and that wealth? But also, how do they pick a real estate agent or broker? Like, how do they figure out who to trust with this like crazy, crazy thing in their life?
Yeah, I mean, that is daunting. And depending on where you live, I mean, people live their entire lives in New York City and have great careers and make a great living and still never buy real estate. I mean, some areas are just, it's just not attainable. I would say my advice would be, consider having some flexibility with where you're going to live. The reason why the Salt Lake market was blown up is because a lot of Californians have moved there, and a lot of people, and so that's people from California decided that Salt Lake had a really high quality of life and was a lot more affordable. Um, so maybe consider, if you're able to, and if you have some mobility, maybe move to an area, and even if it means moving a half an hour away, or moving into an area that might, whatever, like, there's certain areas around here that have always been a little stigmatized, that they're like country or they're backwards or whatever, but maybe consider moving to an area that's less populated, and you might find that you actually really enjoy living there and you can buy way more real estate. From a really practical standpoint, and I know that your listeners are probably extremely educated and probably don't need to hear this, but like, simple things like your credit score. I mean, the better your credit score is, the more affordable, the better interest rates you're going to get, which will make your purchase, a lot more affordable, or the house you want to buy a lot more affordable. Um, Also, I mean, the other thing, going back to what I mentioned about being flexible about where you live, there are certain loans that you can get, if you are willing to live in places that aren't as popular. So like in the US, there are these USDA loans, where if you live in an area that's deemed to be like rural, they're called rural housing loans. You can get low interest rate. You can buy them with almost no money down. You can get help for all your closing costs. So just being willing to have a little bit of flexibility and be willing to consider living in places where you might not otherwise live. The other thing is, I deal with a lot of apartment sales. I mean, if you can find a 4-unit apartment building, you can live in one and run out the other 3, and you can get the income from your 3 tenants who can help you pay your mortgage. Or even if you go out by a 2-unit, you can live in one and run out the other, and that'll help cover your costs. And you can get a standard conventional loan for up to 4 units. So 2, 3, 4 units, you could go and almost anyone can get a loan for something like that, as long as you have credit and income to justify it. And then you can have your tenants help you pay your mortgage, and you can actually cash flow with them. So I'd say, just sort of considering those options. But yeah, if you're living in New York City, it may just be a reality. I think a lot of New Yorkers actually end up buying, they rent in the city, but then they buy a home upstate somewhere. That's like their weekend getaway, because it's affordable, and plus it gives them a way to get out of the city on weekends or in the summer when things are, when it's hot. Um, so those would be my daughter lives in New York City, and she plans to stay in New York, and she's like, Daddy, I'll never be able to afford a house. I'm like, buy one in Harrisburg, and have a tenant living in it, and you'll be able to build wealth that way, and you can just manage them as your tenant, and that's you can develop sort of a long-term investment plan that way. So that would be my yes, but also interest rates going up hasn't helped. There are a lot of challenges right now, but I would also tell someone, if you're frustrated now, these things go in cycles, and probably in a couple of years, it will be easier to buy a home if you can sort of wait it out. In terms of what to look for in a real estate agent, that was your other
Yeah.
question? So
Yeah.
what did you mentioned Paul Frazier, right? That was the
Yeah.
name. I'll know
Yep.
if I ever need to refer someone to, if I ever have anyone who wants to buy a house in Vancouver, I'll notice someone to Paul Frazier. But what did
Well, and
you like about Paul? What was it
well, and
about him?
let me hit on something that I think is important too. Our neighbor just down the street is about to sell their house, and he talked to me. He was like, "Hey, we're thinking about this one real estate agent, but I know you really like yours. What can you tell me?" And I was like, "Well, who's your real estate agent?" And it happened to be the first guy that we dealt with.
No way. Oh, the
Yeah, and I
first
was
guy.
the
Oh,
first guy, and I was like, "Okay, here's why we're not working with that guy. It's not that guy specifically, but he works for that guy's company." And I was like,
yeah.
"Man, here's the experience I had with him versus here's the experience I had with Paul." And what it is for Paul that stood out is when I went into the house that he was selling, and I did not want to buy this house at all. Like I did not want to do it, and I was like super sour about the first house that I bought, and I was like real bummed on the situation. And it was like a very specific situation, which I won't get into. But um, talking to Paul, and this dude was not trying to sell me anything. He was just like, "Oh, well, like if you own a house, why are you trying to buy a new house? And what happened with that house? Like, what was it like? What was your experience like?" So this wasn't my agent. This was someone else's agent. Was like, "Oh, like I'm sorry you had that bad experience. Like, tell me about it. Hey, have you thought about what you could do with this property? And if you stayed in this property, what you'd be able to do?" And it was more just like talking to someone who genuinely was like, "Oh, you're kind of in a bad situation. Well, here's what I know who could help. I've got no financial tie to this guy. The way I was talking to him, the likelihood that I was going to buy the house he was selling was very, very low. He
Yep.
just
Right.
genuinely felt bad and wanted me to do well and wanted to help. And also wanted to address kind of the idea of like, oh, you might have a sour feeling about this, but like, here's how you could turn that into something good. The idea that it was someone who could offer such really practical strategy from like how you turn this around, how this won't be a disaster for you financially from a wealth building perspective, but also demonstrating real genuine care while largely ignoring anyone else who was coming to the house because they were just kind of like going through the house on their own. But
Right.
here's this one guy who's kind of like meh, and it was really cool. He really took time out of his day because he knew I was kind of like not feeling it and wanted to have a conversation of why. The helpfulness, the attentiveness, the empathy, the ability to kind of read the room and like oh, these people are fine looking on their own. I should pay attention to this guy. It was so impressive, and I didn't feel like I was being maneuvered or sold to at all, that I did end up kind of trusting this guy. We ended up buying that property. I was relatively happy with that property, and that property ended up was able to leverage that to buy where I'm at now. So it was a huge win, and that's why I wanted to work with him.
Well, and give yourself some credit. There's probably something about you that he felt connected to as well. He felt like he could actually have a conversation with you. And I think that that's, I'll work with most people, but I've gotten to a point in my life for sure where I'm a little bit more selective. If I have a bad feeling about someone from the beginning, I'm probably not going to want to work with them because it is a relationship. Um, when you commit to working with someone, especially as a buyer or agent, but also in selling their property, it could take 3 days, or it could take 3 months, or it could take 3 years, God forbid. I mean, you have to be committed to working with this person. You have to feel like there's a working relationship that can be established. You have to feel like you have probably some shared, um, you know, ethical approach as well. So there may have been something about you that he felt connected to as well. So that's could be interesting. You can ask him that next time you see him, if what it was about you that really that drew him in. But um, I think that that's one of the cool things about real estate as well, is if we were talking about the car example. I hate comparing real estate salespeople to car salespeople, but if you sell cars from Honda or whatever, and someone comes on the Honda lot and they want to buy a Subaru, you can't sell anything to them. What I love about real estate is I can meet someone who wants to look at a property that I'm selling. If it doesn't work, I can go sell them anything else. I can find them. I have that challenge to go and find them in the right place. And you're not limited to just properties that you have listed for sale, or just in a certain area or anything like that. So that's kind of the one thing I really love about real estate, is just like finding that fit for that person, but not being limited really.
So, but what should someone be thinking about when they're looking at which real estate agent or brokerage to work with?
So I think again, that fit is important. And it needs to be someone who you, first of all, that you trust. Second of all, that really has market knowledge, knows what they're doing. Didn't um, you know, I wouldn't discourage someone from working with a new agent, because that new agent is really going to have a lot of energy. And as long as they're working under the supervision of a more experienced agent, they can take care of you very professionally. You will One complaint that people will make about their real estate agent is they didn't return my call. They didn't seem like they were available when I needed them. They never seemed like they had time for me. Well, if it's a new agent, they're going to have you're probably their only client, or one of their few clients. So you'll get the time and attention that you'll want from them. But I would say definitely local market knowledge is really important. Like, they need to know that certain sections of certain towns, go for a higher price than other sections, or they need to know sort of, if you want a big school district versus a small school district, they need to know, the differences in sizes amongst the school districts, or where the district lines are. Um, so I think having someone who understands, what prices, the local market, what the market values are for the homes, is really important. Um, and I know, we talked about this before, but how do you find a real estate agent? That's a really good question. And I really believe the same way that you told your neighbor, to go and list with Paul, that's kind of the best way to find a real estate agent, is just talk to people who you know and you trust, who have recently bought homes or sold homes, and ask them what their experience was. If they tell you it was lousy, then you'll know to cross that person off the list. But if they tell you it went well, that's someone who you should consider for sure. I don't do a lot of advertising. I never have. I don't do billboards. I don't do TV ads. I don't really even do a lot of internet stuff. I boost listings from time to time, but 90% of my business comes from referrals and past clients. And I've really, this sounds counterintuitive, but I always think if someone needs to advertise too much, they probably don't have enough business on their own. Maybe they haven't treated their clients really well, so they have to go out and find new clients who they have no connection with at all, and who are clueless as to who they are as people. So I've kind of taken the opposite approach, which is like, people can find me based on, their friends who recommend me, or based on, their experience with me in the past selling their homes, and it's worked out really well for me.
Yeah.
So I would say, find people you trust, and ask them what their experience was. I would definitely interview a few agents too. Like, don't meet one person and say, okay, I'm going to work with you. Like, they won't be offended if you say, hey, I'd like to sit down and have coffee with you and tell you what our needs are. And when you're done, it's okay to say, I'm going to talk to a couple of other people and then I'll get back in touch with you. Um, Chances are, if they're good agents and they're really confident, they know you'll end up going back to them in the end anyway, because the other people they talk to aren't going to make the same impression. So do your due diligence, know that you are tethered to this person. Especially as a buyer agent in the United States, the laws are changing, and soon you will have to sign what's called a buyer agency agreement with your agent. That will have, it's always existed. We've always had these contracts, but it wasn't required to sign them with agents. But most agents are going to make you sign this agreement that says that explains how they are compensated and what your financial responsibilities are going to be to them as a buyer. So understand what you're signing, ask a lot of questions about what you're signing, and understand what you're signing up for with that agent.
Heck yeah. Um, I want to ask you another question about how you build your talent pipeline on your business. And then after that, I want to get into what got you into being a real estate agent, because it's a super interesting story, because you didn't actually set out to be a real
Hell
estate
no.
broker.
No
All
way. Hell
right,
no.
we'll get to that in a sec. Um, but you're part of a family business, and
Yes.
you're a part owner now. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So I know it's like a legacy business, family owned. You're kind of building it forward. You want it to continue to exist. How do you build a pipeline? How do you grow your business and find young agents to go out and do the business in a way that you believe reflects how you think it should be done?
That's a great question. And every company does things differently. Some companies have no interest in growing at all. It takes work to manage agents, and I'm our broker of record, which means that I literally have to supervise. We have about 40 agents here, and so I have to supervise all of them. Um, so some companies want to stay very lean and very mean. They don't want to they want to be kind of boutiquey because there's way less management involved, way less headache. Some companies want to grow exponentially. You'll more national companies that you'd see them all over, really all over the world, national, international. They're required by the franchise or to grow a certain amount every year, and they're required to add a certain number of agents to their roster every year, or else they'll lose their franchise. So they very aggressively go out and recruit um, new agents, either current agents who are working somewhere else, or recruit brand new agents. We've always taken a very organic approach. We want to grow. We know you need, in order to evolve and survive, you have to grow because you lose people. Naturally, agents will leave. And so you want to make sure you're, gaining more than you're losing, but it has to be the right fit. I think the number one word, I think, is professionalism for our company. We want people who are professionals, not people who are doing things kind of halfway or who are gimmicky or who, will, like you said, will say anything they need to say to get a deal. We want people who are professionals, and we have cultivated a family atmosphere here at our company. And we want people who kind of fit into that family as well. And so I know that's sort of amorphous, but you kind of know it when you meet someone the first time and you interview them, or they're interviewing you, whatever it is, if they're thinking about coming to you, you get that feeling. Um, I would say in order to grow, it's important to, first of all, be successful, because people, when they see your signs up everywhere and your name on it, as an agent, they're going to say, boy, I'd like to go and work with that person because it seems like they're having a lot of success. It's also treating people really well. We've had a lot of agents who've come here to work who I did a deal with, who at the time worked for a different company. And we had a good working relationship. We got along really well. The deal went well. And at the end, a year later or whatever, when they were thinking about changing companies, they remember that experience and they call me. Um, so I think that's a big part of it too. And it's like your reputation is everything. So as a person, but also as a company, if you have a stellar reputation, people will want to go and be associated with you. If you have a lousy reputation, they won't, So I think it's sort of a combination of a lot of different things.
Um,
We don't do a lot of advertising. We're not like TV ads. Hey, we're hiring new agents, just because it's not a great way to get quality people necessarily.
just an industry specific question that I've always been curious about. Does a real estate agent have to work with a brokerage? Can they be totally independent, or do they have to work with a company like yours?
They have to work with them. Unlike lawyers, if you're a lawyer, go to law school, you pass the bar exam, you can hang your own shingle and start your own company. Real estate agents have to work under a broker. Until now, eventually when they become a broker on their own, they can just start their own business and work by themselves. But yes, you have to work under the supervision of a broker.
If you if you're comfortable explaining it, how does the financial model work? So, for example, it's like it's 100% commission based. So I would imagine part of that commission then goes to the brokerage.
Yeah, yeah. Part of the commission goes to the brokerage just to keep the lights on. And that has been a sliding scale too. When I first started, it was normal that the brokerage kept 50%, sometimes 40 or 50% of the commission. It's now really changed. I'd say the industry average is probably 70 to 80%. Some companies it's 90%.
Wow.
Um, Now the reality is there's a cost to that, obviously. Um, Maybe 50% was too much. Um, but what happens is the higher the lower the percentages the company keeps, the less the agent will really um, the less the company can really provide to the agent, I believe. And
Right.
so there are brokerages where there might be one broker for the entire state of Pennsylvania. Whereas like I'm a broker locally and we have 40, we're a locally owned company, and we have 40 agents. There might be one broker in the entire state for, 10,000 agents.
Right.
So as you can imagine, there's not a lot of supervising going on necessarily. And
Yeah.
who knows what they're out there doing. And then those agents are the ones who tend to get sued or tend to lose their licenses. And then as a broker, if I'm supervising them, I get pulled into that and it's a headache. So um, but if you're only taking a very small percentage of each commission as a company, you have to have volume. You have to have a lot of agents doing a lot of deals. So there tends to be like less supervision in those companies, I believe.
Right. Um,
But
all
that's
right.
the reality. The company takes a certain percentage, and that covers like, most of our agents have an office or a workspace. We pay for the real estate signs. We have administrative people who handle a lot of the paperwork for them, handle the bookkeeping and things like that. Um, and so there's, mostly from the percentage that our agents pay to the company, that kind of pays for us to keep the lights on.
All right. So we're heading towards the close of the interview. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about how you became a real estate agent, because based on your reaction a few minutes ago, we were like, "Hell no, I didn't think I was going to be one." Um, I'll like kind of lead us into this. So you grew up, your dad was a had this real estate brokerage. You'd gone off to college, but didn't really have a sense of what you wanted to do. You weren't planning on doing that, but you were just like, I don't really know what I want to do, which led you to getting into the Peace Corps, which led you to Poland, which eventually led you to your very short-lived law practice. So tell us the story of that and how all that happened.
Yeah, so I was on the verge of graduating from college and I was still in state college and like Junction had kind of like wrapped up. Art Monk was still happening. Um, but I think I had a sense I didn't really, I mean, at that point, I think I was probably involved with maybe our first 10 releases or so. I really kind of quickly realized that my aspiration was not to run a record label. Like our idol, to me, like the record labels that I wanted to emulate were like Discord, Revelation, and Touch and Go. Those were like the three that were sort of like, aspirational in terms of quality of the music they put out, consistent quality and um but I and the ethos that went along with all those labels. I just kind of realized that started to realize that running a record label wasn't my gig. Eric was really good at it. Great business person. I'm sure you're aware. He just, he started after Art Monk, he then had Lumberjack Distribution, and then he started his own record pressing plant, Furnace, which he just sold to Metallica. And
Mhm.
I don't have the moxie to ask him how much he sold it for, but I don't think he ever has to work again. I can safely say that. So anyway, he had that drive. I didn't have it at the time to do that, to do a record label. So I decided I wanted to do something totally different once I was graduating. A lot of my friends who are musicians were leaving state college and moving to bigger cities and, trying to get into the scenes there. But I kind of just wanted to do something totally different. Um, but I wasn't sure what it was. But I was walking across campus one day and there was a job fair, and I was like, oh, like I don't have a job. I wonder what this is all about. And one of the first booths I saw was a recruiter for the U.S. Peace Corps, which I really didn't know much about. I just thought it was kind of a hippie thing from the 60s. Um, so I stopped and started, I talked to the woman who was working there, and she, basically said, it's really cool. You can go and live somewhere else in the world. It's a 2-year commitment. And I said, I have no skills at all. I'm a sociology major. I'm like a very solid C student in college. Um, I like to read, I like to write, like I have certain soft skills, but I don't have any hard skills at all. And she said, that's okay. You have time on your side, because I was graduating probably like 10 months later. And she said, a lot of the opportunities we have are for teachers in Eastern Europe. She said, basically, based on your skill set, you have two options. You can either be a teacher in Eastern Europe, or you can be a beekeeper, because we'll teach you how to be a beekeeper. And I was like, fuck that. I am not going to be that. I would be a terrible beekeeper. Um, but I said, the teaching thing seems kind of interesting. And she said, you'd be teaching English. Recently, Eastern Europe had just democratized. A lot of the English teachers in Eastern Europe had gone into the private sector, where they could make a lot more money because all those economies had opened up to the West. So they needed English speakers. And so they had a shortage of English teachers at that point. This is 1995, 1994, 1995. So I said, well, that sounds cool, but I'm not a teacher. And she said, well, go and do like some tutoring or something like that, so you can put that on your application that you have some experience. So I did some tutoring of some high school students in Spanish, because I had just done a semester abroad in Spain, and my Spanish was okay, good enough to like, get a passing grade in high school, so I could like help these kids pass. Um, so I did that on a volunteer basis for a few months. And then I came back to her and I said, okay, I did this teaching. I have something for my application I can put on. And she said, great. She helped me through the application. She did my interview. She submitted my application. And then around Easter time, I found out I was going to Poland. And I had never been to Poland. I'd been to, surprisingly, in high school, I took a trip to Eastern Europe. We were in Russia and Czech Republic, and actually Turkmenistan. We kind of went all over the place. And I'd been in Western Europe, but I'd never been to Poland. So I had to sort of look on the map and figure it out. I got a language tape of Polish and was like, what the fuck is this? How am I going to live in this country if this is the language? These don't even sound like words to me. Um, but I took the assignment and I went through a couple months of training there with my group of about 50 people, where they taught us. We did 3 months of teacher training and language training. Um, Picked up the language pretty quickly because we were living with families. And I got my teacher certification to teach ESL, and not to teach it, yeah, ESL. And then I got assigned to this little village outside of Krakow, Poland, and it was teaching at an agricultural school, where none of the kids, they were really great kids, but none of them had any interest in learning English at all, because they were at that time, and this is, the mid 90s, they hadn't joined the EU yet. They weren't really traveling. They were from, the small village where, they grew up on farms. They had no interest in leaving the area, no need to learn English. The only way I could get a lot of them to learn it is, a lot of the kids, for whatever reason, were into like super into metal. And so I would like give them assignments to like translate metal song, like Metallica songs or like Slayer songs. And they were interested in like me explaining them what the lyrics and stuff like that. And so like that was the only way. Or I would just make them do like bogus assignment. Like we'd watch, a clip from like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and like we'd talk about, like anything to like trick them into hearing English, or like maybe learning a few words here and there. Um, I was not a great, needless to say, I was like a very average to probably below average teacher, I would say. I don't know if anyone learned a lot of English, but like we had fun. And honestly, I had other friends who were in my group, who were teaching at like way more academic high schools, or like where they were like, the kids wanted to do Model UN. So, they were like their supervisors for Model UN. And these kids were like really wanted to learn English, but that wasn't, those weren't the kids I was working with. But we had to pick up a project because we didn't teach on Fridays and we had summers off, obviously. So we had a responsibility to pick up another project as a Peace Corps volunteer. And I ended up working for a woman who was a human rights lawyer in Krakow at Jagiellonian University, which is one of the oldest universities in Europe. And she was an international lawyer. She was teaching law students how to become international lawyers and how to do human rights law. And so I just through like, I met someone who worked at the consulate in Krakow, and she told me about this really interesting woman. And I met her, and she asked me to help her teach.
Mhm.
Not that I knew anything about law or international law, but because I was a native English speaker, I could kind of help her students as they were learning how to write briefs, learning how to speak publicly, learning how to, debate, learning how to do mock trials and things like that. So I would come along to her lectures that were in English, and I would help the students kind of, learn how to practice in English. So while doing that, I got to learn a little bit about the law too, and I started to get interested in possibly becoming a lawyer. Um, I also, during that time, met a couple of professors, law professors from the U.S. who were ran legal clinics at their colleges and their law schools in the U.S., which were basically legal aid offices where law students would give free legal service and advice to indigent people in their communities, which they didn't have in Poland. They didn't have it anywhere in Europe. It didn't exist at the law schools. At the time, I don't know what it's like now, but European law schools were very theoretical, just theory based. And then once you graduated, you would go and work as basically do an internship or work under a mentor. And that's how you would learn to practice law. But there was no practical teaching in the schools themselves. So I met a couple of professors who were in Europe in Krakow for a conference, and they were talking to me about, how these exist in the US, but not in Poland. And they said, do you think you'd be interested in helping start one in Poland at your school? And again, I said, I don't know anything about the law, but I'm like, I can bring people together who do, and I can try to figure out how to make this thing happen. It's like booking a tour, really, or starting a band. And so I was able to, we got 4 or 5 really qualified international, lawyers who were Polish, who were also on the faculty at the university. We found a space. We got some grant money. I wrote some grant applications to the Ford Foundation and to some other big international foundations. We got some money from the UN, and we started this legal clinic. And the first day we were open, we put out a press release. And the deal is it's law students, and they work under the supervision of law professors and attorneys who, so, they're not out there sort of floating around in the ether. They actually have, they have supervision. But we put out a press release, and it was a novel idea that didn't exist in Poland. So it got picked up by a lot of the news stations, and it actually worked too well, because I went into our office the first day we were technically open, and there was a line of people out the door who had come to get free legal advice. And I'm the only one there, because I was like, I was the one who had to open the door that morning. So I was like, in my, bad Polish, I was like, I am not a lawyer. I can't really help you, but, here's a form, fill this out, give me your information, and someone will call you. Well, I think we had like 80 people that first day. And we ended up we did a lot of refugee law assistance. There were a lot of people who were refugees who were trying to get, either from further east or coming from further south, and they were trying to get into Western Europe, but they would get stuck at the border in Poland. It wasn't their intention to land in Poland, but they get stopped there. So they had to pursue their refugee status in Poland. So, and there's a refugee center near our law school. So a lot of our students helped those people get refugee status, which is really cool. There was a lot of domestic violence victims who we helped, and some other like civil matters. But anyway, it went really well, and the other law schools in Poland started to hear about it as well, and they thought, well, geez, if the University of Krakow is doing this, we should be doing that as well. And so within about 2 years, all 13 law schools in Poland had started legal clinics of their own. And then we started to get some exposure sort of regionally. So like I ended up working with some groups in Hungary. I know Czech Republic, they started them, and then further Western Europe, they started to do legal clinics. So it just kind of came, from an idea, from a couple of conversations, and that to this day, that I know the legal clinic in Krakow is still running. So anyway, that's a very long way to say that's from that experience, I decided I wanted to go to law school because it just seemed like a natural transition. And so when I was done with my time in Poland, I went to law school in DC at Catholic University.
So you went to law school, did the whole thing to get into it, but your legal career was relatively short-lived. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, my first year of law school, I worked for a judge in DC who was it's called a it's a they call it a clerkship, a legal clerkship. So I worked for a judge. That was a great experience. And so and obviously we were doing litigation. It was criminal law, but I decided I wanted to try to be a litigator. So I was living in DC with my wife. We were very happy there. We had our first child, and I got a job offer in Harrisburg from a law firm here that seemed like a really good fit. So we picked up and moved to Harrisburg, back to my hometown, with a child in tow, which kind of influenced our decision too, because we had family support here. So I did work for a law firm. I did commercial litigation for a couple of years. I hated it. It was just not a good fit for me. If I was to be a litigator, I really needed to be like in the courtroom all day. I think that would have been a better fit, but it was a lot of just research, writing, drafting briefs. I very little, if any, client interaction at all, because you're working like under a partner who really has the relationship with the clients. And I just was fidgety a lot. I was very distracted. I was not enjoying the process at all. And I knew, although I said hell no about real estate earlier, never pictured, I didn't want to be a real estate agent because that's what my dad was. And that's what, that was his thing. And I wanted to do my own thing. But he never pushed me to do it. He wasn't trying to, encourage me even to be a real estate agent. Growing up, it was just people would always say, "Oh, you're going to be an agent like your dad," and I'd say, "No, no, no, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to be a punk rocker." Um, so I ended up while I was still practicing law, I decided I was going to get my real estate license just because to have it as like a side thing. And by the time I finished my license, I always knew my brother also works with me as well. And he's my older brother. Whenever he and my dad would get together and talk about real estate, there was like an excitement in the air. And like I could tell that they're really passionate about it. And there's so many aspects to deals and clients and things. And um, as a lawyer, you're not like hanging out talking with other lawyers about your civil litigation or your commercial litigation. It's the last thing you want to talk about when you're not working. Um, so I knew that I saw the excitement that they got from the from the profession, and I was very unhappy practicing law, and I thought, "What the hell, I'm just going to try it." I went home to my wife, and this is a funny story. I went home to my wife, and I was like, we had just had our second child, and I said, we had a mortgage, we had car payments, we had all this stuff, and I had a pretty well-paying job as a lawyer, and I went home and I said, "We need to talk." And she was like, "Oh God, what?" And I said, "Well, I want to make a career change." And I swear to God, so she paused and kind of looked at me, and she was sweating. And I said, I got my real estate license, and I think I want to go and give it a shot to sell real estate. I mean, I can work with my dad, work with my brother, they love it. I think I'd be really good at it. I think it's a good fit. And she was like, like, like all this weight went off of her shoulders. And she looked so relieved. And I said, I thought your reaction would be way worse. I thought you'd be, pretty upset because this is commission based. So this is a big risk. And she said, "I thought you were going to tell me you wanted to be a roadie." Because at the time, some of our friends were like starting to, like actually tour professionally and do well. She's like, "I thought for sure you're going to say you just wanted to drop everything and become a roadie." And I was like, "Oh my God." So from there on, I had her full support, but it was a little scary to go 100% commission.
Well, what can you say? What can you share with us about like that? I know it wasn't like a total leap into nothing. Like it wasn't a
Right.
complete leap of faith because you had a family history, there was a job to go into, but you did leave something that you had to work really hard to attain, and also that had like a pretty serious paycheck involved. You left a very lucrative career to do something that had a question mark, but you did it because you wanted to be happy. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky I figured it out when I did. It's funny, since then, I mean, I still have friends from that law firm who are now, have become, we are all kind of entry level at that point, but they're still there, and they've become partners and they've done very well for themselves. But I've had people who have, gone into the 12th or 13th, 15th year of their legal careers, and they've said, God, I wish I did what you did when you did it. Um, Not necessarily become real estate agents, but to get into something else. Because once you get to a certain point in your career, it is very hard to leave it. The golden handcuff thing is a real thing,
Hmm.
because each year your compensation goes up, and as you know, as you mentioned, the cost of living in Vancouver, your your spending tends to sort of track your earnings. So, you can really get yourself bogged down with debt and responsibilities, and it becomes harder and harder to leave that lucrative career. So I think in some ways I was lucky I did it, relatively early
Hmm.
on. I was used to living, probably below, at or below the poverty line, with being a college student, then living in Poland where I was making $200 a month, and then being, a relatively poor law student living in expensive cities. So I hadn't really gotten used to, a certain lifestyle that we were too attached to. But I just think when and if you're generally a happy person, if you're generally a relatively satisfied, like grounded person, and then you get into a career and you're miserable, there's something that it's the career, it's not you. And
Yeah.
so, there is, it's scary, but if you can make even, and the change doesn't have to necessarily be to, do a wholesale change of your career. Maybe it's going and working for a different organization, or, or getting rid of a partner, or bringing on a new partner, or making some adjustments can really make a world of difference. But again, if you're a person who's generally like a pretty balanced person, and and your career is making you out of balance, then it's time for a change.
Yeah, I like to speak to that. I think that nothing will make you a stranger to yourself more than working at a job that you're miserable in. And what I mean by that is, for I'll use myself as an example. I love what I do. Like I really like being a coach. I really like working with people to help solve their business problems, the company cultural problems, help people grow as leaders, create better leadership culture, to communicate better. Like I love that. Like I totally love it. And I found it completely by accident. I worked for a company before I started Cadence that was like kind of a cousin of what I do. It's like sort of executive coaching. And their company culture was the worst. It was total Shark Tank. It was like everyone was like
Mhm.
backstabbing each other to get the sale and all that. And it was just really bad. And very specifically, it was a family ran company, and the family were awful. Like a my boss was just a kid who grew up with money and privilege, and is like kind of like a rich kid, right? And it was so shitty. But I had left being a therapist, and like I was in this thing, and I started making a lot of money. And in fact, I was making more money than I ever thought I would make in my life. And my
Mhm.
life changed as a result of that. But I was so unhappy. I was so depressed. I was so like, what do I do if I leave this? I'm going to be making like literally a quarter of what I make right now if I go back to being a therapist. My life had adapted to like how much money I was making at the time.
Sure.
I
I
was
always have.
the I was the worst version of myself. I became a complete stranger to myself, where I was so unhappy and doing things that only made me more unhappy, but unable to not do them. And I'm really lucky that like the way my life went, I ended up like being finding myself in a position where I started my own company. And it was like a huge life changing thing, because it was like waking up out of a dream where I was like, who the fuck was that person for the past 5 years? Like, that's not me. That's not who I am. And it was really good I was really fortunate to have the events happen that led me to starting Cadence and kind of like getting to know myself again. Because being super unhappy in a career where you're spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week, like totally focused on this thing, being tied to it because of those golden handcuffs, and then also feeling like, I hate this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be in this company. I don't even know if I like this job. but I have to do it for the money, or thinking you have to do it for the money, to realizing, oh, I actually love what I do. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to focus on this thing. I've got my own thing, but like I care about the money, but I care way more about being happy and healthy and doing things that like I feel good about. It was like if I'd stayed in that job, I don't know what would happen to me. But at the same time, I was making at that time the most money I'd ever made, but I was just totally miserable. So staying in a job that you hate, but you're staying there because of money, it will turn you into a stranger to yourself 100%.
But what do you think, what did you have in you? What was that sort of innate thing in you that made you know that there was something better out there, or made you know that like, because I mean, frankly, like I totally understand it. For most people, I think if you just, what they're looking for is like stability
Mhm.
and sort of predictability. And so if they're in a career or a job that even they don't love, or maybe that makes them miserable, at least it like it gives them a certain amount of stability and predictability that they're looking for. What was it that made you know that there was something more out there, or that you were, or that you deserve better for yourself?
As corny as this is going to sound, it's the music that we grew up with that I'd
Mm.
be like listening to, because I still always like loved hardcore and punk, and I've always been like quite involved in it. But I was listening to all these records and going to see all these bands that had lyrics where I was like, oh, the thing that you're singing about, that you're saying is like shitty. I've actually kind of become like that a little bit.
Right.
And
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah, it was like, I was listening to the Disengage 7 inch at one point, and I was
Mm.
like, oh, this song, these three songs are just about me right now. Like
Right.
this is just the life I'm living, and
Right.
really feeling like, holy shit, I'd become this total stranger to myself. And
Mm.
I'm a guy that grew up on like Minor Threat, and I like, out of this might sound odd, but out of every band, every punk and hardcore band, probably my favorite band is Embrace. Like that's the most impactful record of my life.
Yeah.
And um, I've never met Ian Mackay. I've always kind of been like, oh, I don't want to meet him. I was like, he's written so many songs and been part of so many things that have literally like changed my life. That Embrace record is the way that I want to go through life, is not mapped out on that, but like I want to have that level of just like I just want to be happy and like kind of
It
plugged into
kind
the
of is a
people.
roadmap, though. I mean, honestly, it
Yeah,
is, that record is astounding. It is a roadmap to your life. And he probably wrote that when he was like 24 or something. You know what I mean? Like
totally,
whatever it was, it's
totally.
all there.
I want to be happy. I want to be just a good husband, a good father, a good friend. I want to be plugged into my community, understand what's happening. I want to do the good things that I can do. I don't want to be blind to the suffering of the world. And I was in this job that just turned me into the worst version of myself. Like so different than who I am. And it's not the employer's fault. It's not anyone's fault but myself, because I stayed in the job. And I stayed in the job because I wanted predictability. I wanted comfort. I wanted to be able to own a house and all these things. But a lot of the music that we grew up with, it was just like, I am not who I'm supposed to be right now. I'm like,
Right.
I've gotten off sideways. But also when I ended up leaving that company and I was in a really terrible place in my life, it was also the music and the ideas and the things that like people in our scene kind of grow and learn, but also the ability to build things and have good relationships. That's what allowed me to get back up on my feet. It's what allowed me to start Cadence. Um, when I started Cadence, I had exited that other company. And the day I exited that other company, I called all my clients and just said, hey, I just started my own company. And they're like, you did? I'm like, yeah. They're like, what's it called? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't have a name yet. They're like, okay, what do you do? I'm like,
Called Embrace.
they're like, well, what do you do? I'm like, I kind of do a version of what I did before, but like way more based in psychology. And they're like, well, that sounds kind of vague. I'm like, yeah, I haven't figured it out yet. They're like, all right, well, how much are you going to charge? I'm like, I don't know. I don't have it. Like less than what we did before. Like, okay. But I'd had good enough relationships with people, and I had just had the moxie to call people, that
Yeah,
day I had started my company basically. And
incredible.
within a year, I'd hired 4 people. And then now 8 years later, it's like 30 people. We work globally. Just got back from a European business trip. We're expanding into Europe. All of that is because of, lots of angles, but getting
Sure.
through that darker period of my life, kind of reflecting that I'm not who I want to be, having the guts to go out and start this business, and also like work on myself so I could kind of get back to who I want to be. So much of that comes from punk and hardcore, and the lyrics and the ideas and the people that I met and the things that I aspire to. Something someone said to me about Ray Cappo one time, and they said it to me like they were letting me in on this like terrible secret about Ray Cappo. I was someone who had played in a band with Ray Cappo and was like, Ray Cappo's not actually like that. Like all those lyrics from Youth at and Shelter, he's not really like that. He aspires to be like that. He wishes he was like that, but he's not like that. And when they said it to me, I was like, well, yeah, but isn't that everyone? Like,
Yeah,
don't all
that's right.
people aspire to be better than they are and
Sure.
want to be ways and then fall down and
Right.
act like shitheads? And some people do it more than others. Like I think of a guy like Ray Cappo, who I don't know at all. I've had a few interactions with him, and some have been okay and some haven't been. But what I'd say is like, I think it's incredible to aspire to be something amazing and also recognize that you can be a total shithead, but also
Right.
get up on your feet and then start working and try and be that person more than you're not that person. I think that's like a really powerful thing. Anyways, I'm pulling away from your story a little too much. I want to go back to you.
No, when you talk about embrace, I was thinking like the number of people who have told me that at some point in their lives, when they're trying to make a decision, like, there's a divergent path and they're trying to figure out which path to take. Like there's Ian's voice is like in their head, like what would Ian, like what would Jesus do? Like, what would Ian do? It's like,
Totally.
it's a real thing, and it's
Yeah.
really, and for some people, I mean, frankly, for some bands, it's probably sort of financially in some ways strapped them, because they've not done things that probably would have been the financially, smart things to do. But like Fugazi wouldn't do that, or Ian wouldn't do that. But, in terms of like, but for the most part, that what would Ian do is like, it would be the right thing,
Mm.
and those lyrics are definitely a guide. And, so no, I agree about that Embrace record a lot. I we were talking off camera. I saw Ian do a Q&A the other night. It was like a virtual Q&A about the Fugazi Instrument movie. And it was so cool. Like there were maybe 20 people in the audience, and it was a Sunday night, and I'm sure he had other things he could have been doing, but he spent an hour and a half just like, and some people there were like very much in the know about Fugazi, and some people had never heard of Fugazi before in the audience. And one guy said, "Hey, you guys were around in the late 80s, early 90s. Like, do you remember grunge?" And Ian was like, "Yes, I'm familiar with grunge music." And he's like, "So were you really influenced by those like grunge bands?
Oh
Was like
no.
Fugazi, like, were you really influenced with them at the time?" And to his credit, he could have been like, "No." But he gave a really thoughtful answer to this guy. This guy who asked the question was probably 30 or whatever. Like, he's, his band was, the kid probably wasn't even born when the band was happening, but he gave a really thoughtful answer. And he's like, "Well, when we were Minor Threat, we are trying to play some shows in the Pacific Northwest, and there was this band called the Farts, and and they were this really good like punk band, and some of the guys from Mudhoney were in that band, and we reached out to them. We tried to make a show happen. So like the show never happened, but I kind of got to know, the guys who were Mudhoney, and he's like, and he's like, there were some other people, and we knew the guys from Sub Pop, and so we knew what was happening there, and we had some mutual respect, but in no way were we influenced by any of those bands. And that wasn't, he's like, we were listening to Dub, and we were listening to the Stooges, and we were listening to Wire. Like that's what turned into Fugazi. But it was like a really thoughtful answer to his credit. And like that's a situation where he could have just kind of been dismissive or whatever. But like it reminds me, like it was another lesson of like, that's a cool way to handle sort of, uninformed questions, and he handled it like super gracefully.
Heck yeah.
So what would you do? He did the right thing.
So let's go into the crucial three. I'm going to ask you three increasingly difficult questions that we go on. You already have some insight into the process here as we did it last time. But I'm going to start with what I think is one you're not ready for. So in your story, you've talked repeatedly about being a average or even below average student.
Hmm.
But also in your story, you've done consistently really cool and interesting things. So, and this is me saying this, so you don't, no need for you to be humble here. I thought Junction was really, really cool, really unique, cool sounding band, put out cool records. Art Monk Construction, which is great. Really, really liked that record label. It had a big impact on me when I was younger. Then you wanted to be in the Peace Corps, and you were in a situation where you had students that were like disinterested, but you were able to tap into like a way to work with them, which was through metal. And like I love that like you're getting them to like work on Slayer lyrics. I think that's like charming and awesome. Then you went on to create this law clinic. That's something that had never happened that literally helped hundreds, if not thousands of people and now and changed the way law schools were working in Poland and has gone on to make a huge impact. Then you went on to go into the legal place, and you had the guts to choose happiness over a paycheck. So while you haven't always had great grades, and I'd imagine when you got into the legal space, you probably got better grades, but while you weren't always like an academic, you were always a doer, and a doer of meaningful things and things that added to the culture and made a difference. So thinking about that, if you were in school again now, would you still be an average student, or would you apply yourself differently?
Yeah, that's always a tough line to toe when, as a parent, when like, do you really tell your kids how shitty of a student you were, or do you know, is it like do as I say, not as I do? But to be honest, once I got to law school, I think the thing about school is I never really cared. I didn't see that it was like I didn't know, other than knowing I needed to graduate, I didn't know, I didn't look at school as like a tool to, to get me somewhere else. When I went to law school, that changed because I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and I knew it to have like some sort of meaningful career. I needed to apply myself. And also I was really interested in the law. So I was a very good student in law school, and I studied my ass off. Um, but I think what I learned is like, I think I just never really thought I could be a good student, and law school taught me that I could be a good student. So yeah, if I went back to high school now, I'd probably be a straight A student, I guess, and college the same. But would I do it differently? Not at all. Like I also had a lot of fun in high school. I went to shows, I played basketball a lot. I hung out with my friends. Like, the time I would have spent in order to be a good student, I would have had to probably not do a lot of things that I like to do. Same thing with when I was in college. I was doing Junction and put a lot of time into doing the band and doing a record label. I wouldn't have been able to do those things if I was a serious student. So, it's sort of like you're going to become who you are regardless.
Yeah. All right, second question. Uh, you have pursued things throughout your life that you're into, and you've done really well when you're into them. So even like you decide you want to be a lawyer, and becoming a lawyer, that goal made you a good student when you've been pretty mediocre at it before. So a lot of your stuff has to do with pursuing things that you love to do and that you're excited about, even if those things make no sense financially or career-wise. You just want to go and do it. What's your advice for people who are starting their careers, their early life, and they're trying to figure out, should I follow my passion, or should I follow something that's going to make financial sense from a career perspective?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, the easy answer is to say follow your passion, right? That's sort of like the safe, kind of touchy-feely answer. But I don't think I think you should look at your life as as a marathon, not as a sprint. And having children now who will soon be in the workplace, we've told them like get the first job under your belt, and you don't know if you're going to like it. I mean, I remember there were classes I took in law school that I thought would be super interesting, and they ended up being really boring because the professors weren't great. They could take an interesting topic like human rights law. I remember I had a really boring I hope they're not listening. I'm guessing they probably aren't. I had a really boring professor who made my human rights class a drag. But then I remember my contracts law professor was fantastic and made the class so interesting. And you would think that that would be a really dry subject. So I would say like, you know, get that first job, and you don't know if you're going to like it or not. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your passion, but you can build on that to get to the place where your passion is. And you could eventually, use the initial career choices to help get you to where you ultimately want to be. So it shouldn't be just about the money, of course. Like you don't want to do something that's going to compromise your values because you make more money, or you don't want to do something that's going to force you to work in really uncomfortable work situation just because of the money. But it's okay to like take something that's not that sexy and not that exciting as a job if it seems like, it'll be a good and kind of an entree for you into a long and meaningful career.
All right.
That the worst thing
Last
to do is to do nothing. That's a thing to be like, well, I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna like wait until the right thing comes along. That like never works. That'll be a disaster.
it's what you just said there is what I refer to as getting stuck. Uh, when you're just doing like a holding pattern in your life, and you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna, I guess I'm just work this job that I don't really care about and just kind of go along. Like, yeah, but then you're stuck. Like if you're not out there like grinding, trying to make your passion happen, or trying to pursue something that is going to be a career job or financially like beneficial, or something that you're super into just from a educational standpoint, if you're just kind of existing, the potential that you're going to get stuck is high. And it doesn't mean that everyone has to go out and achieve all these crazy things, but getting into the driver's seat of your life and like really like trying to make stuff happen for yourself, I think is one of the most important things you can do. Like not just when you're young, at any age, like get into the driver's seat. Don't be a passenger in your own life.
It's great advice.
All right, man, you ready for the last question?
I think so.
Okay, this is kind of a cheater question because I asked it to you last time. Do you want the cheater question or do you want something really hard?
Oh, I'm a glutton for punishment. Give me the hard one.
All right, well, I'm going to do two then. I'm going to give you the easy one afterwards, but I'll start with the hard one because it's only easy because you answered it before. Here's the hard one. What's one thing you learned about yourself throughout your career that you didn't like? And it could be about your personality, it could be about your work style, it could be how about you approach problems, it could be about anything. Something that, and you could have learned that from self-reflection or feedback, but one thing you really, really didn't like, and what steps did you take to address it?
Um, I think I do not have thick skin. I have very thin skin. And so when something would be going wrong in a deal, I mean, every deal at some point there are challenges. Some deals the challenges are way bigger than others, and some deals there's way more challenges than others. But I think when things would go wrong and a client would get upset or get emotional or get frustrated and sort of lash out at me, I would take it personally. And not in a way that like woes me, but in a way that like, oh, I don't think I did anything wrong here, but maybe I did do something wrong. Maybe this is my fault. Maybe they're upset because I should have done something better. Um, and which I think can be a positive reaction, because if you just kind of blow it off, it doesn't really help you sort of evolve. Um, but what I've realized over time, and it took a toll on me emotionally, it's not enough that I was like going to therapy, but there were, I had sleepless nights sometimes when deals were going sideways. I knew my client was unhappy. And over time, you realize two things. One is like they were unhappy because the deal was going badly. It wasn't because I had done something wrong, but inevitably there's going to be problems. And so, like, my job isn't to, I shouldn't take it personally. It's just the deal that, that needed to be sort of coaxed. So, my energy, instead of having like anxiety about a client being upset, my energy should have been focused on like, how do you fix this situation? So that was one thing. And the other thing you realize is, sometimes when people are lashing out, even if they're lashing out directly at you, it's not because of something you've done. It's because they are dealing with some sort of stressors or several stressors in their life, which is normal. Everyone has them. And you're the one person who happens to be in front of them at the time and can't tell them to go fuck themselves because they're your client. So if they're going to kind of yell at you, they're probably yelling at you because like their boss was a dick to them that day. Someone cut them off in traffic. They're behind in some bill payments. They have a pain. They literally have a pain in their neck or in their back or something. And you happen to be the person there who can take it. And so, I always tell our agents now, like, it's not about you. If you have a client who's being rough with you, just remember they've got something else in their life that's going on, and they're channeling, and that has nothing to do with this deal or you, but they're channeling it through you right now. And so just sort of, it's hard to do, but you have to sort of, let it just bounce off of you, and just know it's not you. So I think like that's something that I definitely was a very thin skin. I took things personally, and I internalized too much. And so I've learned to sort of it's part of also when you turn 50, you sort of like, things don't bother you that much anymore because it's like whatever. So I would say that that's
Totally.
something that's involved with me.
Heck yeah. All right. Last question, cheater question. Most the most important Pennsylvania punk or hardcore band to you?
Oh man. So you asked that question our last session. I have to say I'm changing my answer
Okay. Okay.
because I actually ran the question by a few of my bandmates and friends, and they were like, they didn't really get my answer. So I'm not going to say what my answer was before, but I'm going to change it to something new. Um, so I would say personally, to me, the most important Pennsylvania band is Admiral, as we've talked about. By the way, I don't know if you saw, there's a cool post that Norm Brandon put for Antimatter Zine. He did a post about Admiral actually yesterday or 2 days ago
Cool,
about
cool.
like sort of unheralded bands from back in the day. That was really cool. So I would say Admiral just because of what they meant to me personally in my life. I think in terms of like influence, um, I'm gonna have to say Title Fight
Ah,
because that's
good.
very beloved band. And the long history, and I think their like influence is still to this day. You hear bands that sound like Title Fight. I want to say they're from like Scranton, Wilkes-Barre area.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, the last time you asked me this, I said Turning Point because I always felt like they were a Philadelphia band, but I did go back and check myself, and they were actually from New Jersey. I mean, in like South Jersey, so they were like just over the Philadelphia. They were probably part of the Philly scene, but they're
mhm.
technically not from Philadelphia. So I think I have to. That's one that I have to knock off the list. Um, do you have something to say about that?
At the
You're like,
time, I was like, "Oh, they're New Jersey." I'll put it this way: the first time I ever met someone from Turning Point was in Philadelphia, right? So it's like you're the idea that they'd be like a Philadelphia associated band, and everyone I know
yeah,
from Philadelphia is like, I grew up watching Turning Point, but like
yes.
I thought they were always kind of branded as a New Jersey band, but I didn't want to say anything when he said it. And I
I
was
know.
like, I'm just gonna let history play it out, man.
I
So,
I mean, even admitting to it now, I just lost major punk points. I should have never
oh
admitted to that, but
no,
I did go back
dude.
and check myself. So, and the other band I'm going to say, just in terms of like influence and going back to sort of old school days, there was a punk band from Pittsburgh called Half Life,
Uh-huh.
and they were like early, kind of, I want to say probably early 80s punk band that was like, I think they had a pretty major impact on like Pennsylvania, punk bands in the US and in Pittsburgh. Previously, I said Don Caballero.
Mhm.
That was the last answer I gave because I love them and they are a Pittsburgh band and they were like guys I sort of knew and because they used to play in State College a lot. And when they ended up putting out a record on Touch and Go, it was like a really big deal. And I felt very proud as like a Pennsylvania band that was on Touch and Go. But the drummer for Don Caballero was a drummer for Half Life. So there is some threads between those two answers. So that's what I'm going to say. Half Life, Title Fight, and Admiral.
Heck yeah. Great, great, great answer. All right, man. We are at the end. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It was so fun. Big fan of the show. I'm proud to finally be on it, and I'm so glad that we met at that hardcore show in Oakland that you
Mhm.
played, and that it led to me being able to come on your show. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Heck yeah. All right. So we'll have all of your information in the show in the episode bio. You rock, man. Thank you so much. And everyone, if there's one thing I'd say, if you listen to this and you're thinking about like what's next for me, you don't have to have some grand plan. Like Garrett's life is and career is just so interesting. There's been so many chapters, so many things. Just make sure you're doing something. Get out there, like make something, like paint something, record something, like put on a show, do a zine, start a job, start a career, take a trip. Just go and do something. Don't be on hold because life's not going to wait. My name's Aram and this is One Step Beyond. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Thanks, Garrett.
Peace.